Today, we're looking at the blueprint for one of history's most terrifying structures, the Third Reich. We're going to break down how one man went from being an aspiring artist to the architect of a totalitarian state that literally plunged the entire world into war. So let's unroll the plans and see exactly how it was built. You know, it's the question that just looms over the entire 20th century. How does this happen? Well, this wasn't some random accident of history. No, it was a deliberate construction, built piece by piece, brick by brick. So how is it designed? And what, exactly, were the materials used? To really get it, we're going to follow the architect's plans in 5 main parts. We'll start with the very foundations of his ideology, then look at the blueprint for his political party. After that, we'll see how he actually constructed the state itself, examine the brutal architecture of terror that held the whole thing up, and finally, watch as the entire structure just collapses into ruin. All right, so every building needs a foundation. And for Hitler, that foundation was forged in personal failure, deep resentment, and the unbelievable trauma of war. It's kind of wild when you look at it. Hitler's path to politics didn't start with ambition. It started with rejection. He was turned away from art school, and he just drifted until World War I finally gave him a cause. And in the really bitter aftermath of Germany's defeat, he found his true calling. He joined this tiny French political group that he would very quickly mold in his own image, becoming its undisputed leader just 2 years later. So the Nazi Party wasn't just another political movement. It was a meticulously designed weapon, specifically crafted to seize power. Let's take a closer look at its blueprint. The whole design rested on 3 incredibly powerful pillars, and each one was perfectly tuned to the chaos of post-war Germany. First up, you had a simple binding ideology, nationalism and anti-Semitism that offered easy scapegoats for the national humiliation. Second, a relentless, non-stop propaganda machine to spread that message everywhere. And third, the raw threat of violence and intimidation, using their paramilitary wing, the SA, to literally beat down any opposition. And this is where it gets really chilling. This quote from his own book, Mein Kampf. The strategy is laid completely bare. I mean, this was never about winning arguments with facts or truth. It was about bypassing reason altogether, crafting simple, super emotional messages, and then repeating them over and over and over again for maximum impact. Just imagine the effect of that, day in and day out. And wow, the effectiveness of that blueprint is just startlingly clear when you look at these numbers. In 1928, the Nazis were a nobody party, totally on the fringe. But then the Great Depression hit, and suddenly their simple propaganda and scapegoating found fertile ground in a desperate population. By 1932, just 4 years later, they were the single largest party in the German parliament. The political weapon had been forged and it was ready to be used. Okay, so with the party now a dominant political force, the next phase of construction began, tearing down a democratic republic and putting up a dictatorship in its place. This was the moment, January 1933. The traditional conservatives, thinking they could totally control him, made a fatal miscalculation. They appointed Hitler as chancellor. He now had the keys to the state, and he moved with absolutely breathtaking speed. Just look at the contrast here. It's night and day. Within months, the entire structure of the Democratic Weimar Republic was completely demolished. Using the Reichstag fire as a pretext, civil liberties were just gone. The Enabling Act was passed, which let Hitler rule by decree, totally bypassing the Constitution. All other political parties were banned. The rule of law was replaced by the will of one man. Period. Now, a state like this can't be held up by popular support alone, not even close. It requires a terrifying internal structure, a framework of pure control and fear. This was the architecture of terror. The blueprint for this whole process was a thing called Gleichschaltung, or forced coordination. It's a big German word, but the goal was terrifyingly simple, to bring every single aspect of society, from trade unions and newspapers all the way down to the local hiking club, under Nazi control. The point was to eliminate any space for independent thought or action. And these were the brutal tools they used to enforce it. The SS became a state within a state, running the concentration camps. The Gestapo, the secret police, created this atmosphere of paranoia, where literally anyone could be an informant, your neighbor, your coworker. And the camps, first built for political prisoners, soon expanded to hold anyone the state considered an enemy. This architecture of terror, it reached its most horrific and inhuman conclusion in the Holocaust. The regime's ideology, combined with its absolute control of the state, enabled the systematic, industrial-scale murder of 6 million Jewish men, women, and children, along with millions of other victims, including Roma people, homosexuals, and political opponents. So, the final act of this story is one of complete and total self-destruction. The very ideology that fueled the regime's rise also contained the seeds of its own violent, spectacular demolition. The architects' obsession with expansion and so-called racial purity led directly to World War II. Yeah, there were initial victories, but they gave way to catastrophic defeats. Stalingrad in the east and D-Day in the west sealed the regime's fate. The war came home to Germany, and in April 1945, with his capital and ruins all around him, the architect took his own life. And there it is, the final damning verdict. For all the talk of a glorious empire that would last a millennium, the entire monstrous structure collapsed after just over a decade, and all it left behind was a continent in ruins and a legacy of horror that is just unparalleled. And that really brings us to our final thought here. The story of the Third Reich isn't just dusty old history. It's a warning. When leaders present themselves as these singular architects promising to rebuild a nation from the ground up, what are the signs we should be watching for? When does a blueprint for renewal become a blueprint for terror? It's a question worth thinking